If you have been living under a rock, Apple just held their September event on the 15th of this month and they unveiled quite a number of hardware, but not an iPhone. They unveiled two new iPads, one the standard 8th generation and also a 4th generation iPad Air, and they also launched two new Apple Watches, one Apple Watch Series 6 and also a new Apple Watch Series SE. So the new iPad Air that is launched, that has more features than the standard iPad. And while I was reading the specs, I felt that this new iPad Air, this actually can rival the flagship iPad of Apple, iPad Pro this year. And in my opinion, this is the iPad that people should go for. Let's check out why. I am Devatan and you're watching Tech Aisle. Let's begin. So let's start with what is common between the iPad Air 2020 and the iPad Pro 2020. The obvious one is the compatibility with Apple's standard accessories like the Apple Watch 2nd generation. That 2nd generation is an important word because that is the more refined version of Apple Pencil, and the compatibility with other accessories include their keyboard and also their stands. Both have an aluminum back and frame with a glass front, and they also support nano SIM and eSIM if you go for the LTE version. The screen is also similar technology, IPS LCD, and the pixel per inch or the PPI, which indicates the amount of pixels that you get on each inch, is also quite similar at 265 on the iPad Pro versus the 264 on the iPad Air. But there's a massive difference about which I'll talk about later. The screen itself is very similar. The iPad Air has only the 11-inch variant, but the iPad Pro has an 11-inch and also a 13-inch. Both run on the same version of the iPad OS 14, and both also doesn't have a slot for external memory card. And also, while we are on the topic of things not present, quite obviously you also miss out on the headphone jack. Now that brings us to the cameras. The primary camera on both the iPads is very similar. In fact, they are the exact same. No difference at all. 12 megapixel f1.8 1/3 inch sensor. Besides, you also get 4K video recording at 2430 or 60 fps and 1080 video recording at 30, 60, 120 and 240 fps. Both also have EIS or electronic image stabilization, which means the videos will be more stabilized. The front camera is also very similar, as both of these are 7 megapixel each, but the one on the iPad Air is a fraction wider at f2.0 compared to the f2.2 on the iPad Pro. Now taking a focus away from the cameras, pun intended, we have support for stereo speakers and Bluetooth 5.0. And that pretty much sums up the similarities that we have between the both iPads, as it is very clear the iPad Air has inherited all the good things that you got on the iPad Pro. Let's quickly jump to the things which is more interesting, and that is the things which are different from the both iPads. Sorry for interrupting, but if you like this content, then we hugely appreciate it if you could hit that like button. And if you're new here, I make technology videos every Wednesday at 4 PM, so consider subscribing and hitting the bell icon. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the video. And let's see what is different between the two brothers. The iPad Air is 13 grams lighter, although that could be attributed to the slightly larger battery on the iPad Pro. And next comes, in my opinion, the single largest difference between the both iPads. The iPad Pro has the flagship 120Hz refresh rate, whereas the iPad Air has the standard 60Hz. Absolutely, 120Hz is magnificent, but most of the apps do not support 120Hz or even 90Hz at this stage. So yes, I would like to have that option, but it is not mandatory, I would say. And for the majority of the people, you would not be missing it. Go for the iPad Pro if media consumption and screen is your major focus. Also, the iPad Pro's screen is muchly bright at 600 nits compared to the 500 on the iPad Air. Now to another major difference, and that is performance. Apple has produced the best chip ever. No, not by Apple alone, but the whole of the smartphone market in the form of Apple A14 Bionic chip. And the iPad Air runs it. The iPad Air runs the flagship Apple A14 Bionic chip, and while the iPad Pro runs a slightly more powerful version of the Apple A12 Bionic chip in the form of Apple A12Z. On paper, the one present on the iPad Air is far more superior. It's funny how the flagship model has lower performance compared to the mid-range one. Although in practical usage, you wouldn't be noticing much difference compared to the A12Z and the A14. But again, I would love to have the greatest thing that is possible in my device. Another thing that is different between these two is that the iPad Pro has Face ID, the same one present on the iPhone 11 and the iPhone 10, whereas the iPad Air has a Touch ID. No, not on the home button, which consumes a large portion of the screen, resulting in a large bezels. But Apple finally figured out that they could keep this Touch ID in a place not on the home screen, and they've kept it on the power button. That's fantastic, Apple. Good job. And coming back, we did discuss that the primary camera on both the iPads are the exact same, but the iPad Pro has a couple of tricks up its sleeve. A, it has an ultra-wide camera which allows you to get more in the screen, and B, it also has a LiDAR sensor which helps you with depth imaging and stuff. While the ultra-wide is really useful since you have that versatility, the LiDAR, I don't know how many people are actually using that. And for most of the people, you would not be needing a LiDAR sensor. You would be fine without using one. And finally, the deciding factor between these two iPads, the price. Surely Apple has cut some certain corners in the iPad Air to bring that iPad Air to a lower price point, and as a result, the iPad Pro starts at $799 and goes all the way up to $1649, whereas the iPad Air, hear me out, the iPad Air starts at $599 and goes up to $879. Wow, that is great. Just makes me wonder, did Apple just cannibalize the sales of the iPad Pro with the iPad Air? The reason that I say is the obvious caveats, so to say, are the Face ID versus Touch ID, the cameras, the processor, and the refresh rate. While most of the people would be fine without having a refresh rate, although I would love to have that option, at that price point, I'm not complaining actually. And then the cameras. Honestly, you are getting much better cameras on your smartphone, which is also more compact. And then the processor, it should not be a large difference. You know what? Apple has done the right thing. Apple has taken the right decision to bring that iPad Air to that lower price point. Apple has kept a person in the creative field in mind while designing this iPad Air. And for such a person, the refresh rate, cameras, the processor, that is not going to be a huge difference. But what will be is the price and the support for the Apple Pencil 2nd generation. And with this, the only reason that you should be buying an iPad Pro is only because of that high refresh rate. Only. You are getting almost the same features on the iPad Air compared to the iPad Pro for a lower price point. What do you think? What do you think about the iPad Air versus the iPad Pro? And finally, which would you go for? Alright, that's it for today. Hope you liked it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week. The screen itself is very similar, but the iPad Air has a single version that is 11-inch, while the iPad Pro has 2-inch